Hello, my name is Gary, and I was raised in the Western United States, so I'm a native English speaker. I hope that you will enjoy this YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us.
The Velveteen Rabbit by Marjorie Williams, 1881 to 1944. Once there was a Velveteen Rabbit, and at first he was truly splendid. He was plump and cuddly, just like a rabbit should be. His coat was brown and white, he had real thread whiskers, and his ears were lined with pink satin. On Christmas morning, when he sat snug at the top of the boy's stocking, with a sprig of holly between his paws, he looked absolutely charming. The stocking was filled with other things: nuts, oranges, a toy engine, chocolate almonds, and a clockwork mouse. But the rabbit was the best of all. For at least 2 hours, the boy adored him. Then aunts and uncles came for dinner, and there was a great rustling of tissue paper and unwrapping of presents. In the excitement of discovering all the new gifts, the Velveteen Rabbit was forgotten. For a long time he lived in the toy cupboard or on the nursery floor, and no one paid much attention to him. He was naturally shy, and being only made of velveteen, some of the other more expensive toys ignored him. The mechanical toys were very superior and looked down on everyone else. They were full of modern ideas and pretended they were real. The model boat, which had lived through 2 seasons and lost most of its paint, picked up their attitude and never missed a chance to talk about its equipment in technical terms. The rabbit couldn't claim to be a model of anything, as he didn't know real rabbits existed. He thought they were all stuffed with sawdust like himself, and he understood that sawdust was outdated and shouldn't be mentioned in modern circles. Even Timothy, the jointed wooden lion, who was made by disabled soldiers and should have been more open-minded, acted superior and pretended he was connected with the government. Among them all, poor little rabbit felt very insignificant and ordinary, and the only one who was kind to him was the skin horse. The skin horse had been in the nursery longer than any of the others. He was so old that his brown coat was bald in patches, revealing the seams underneath, and most of the hairs in his tail had been pulled out to string bead necklaces. He was wise, having seen a long line of mechanical toys arrive, boast and show off, only to eventually break and be discarded. He knew that they were just toys and would never become anything more. Nursery magic is very strange and wonderful, and only old, wise and experienced playthings like the skin horse truly understand it. "What does it mean to be real?" the rabbit asked one day, as they lie side by side near the nursery fireplace, before Nana came to tidy the room. "Being real isn't about how you're made," the skin horse said. "It's something that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just as a toy, but with real affection, then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the skin horse, always honest. "When you're real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being activated, or is it gradual?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. "You become real over time. It takes a while. That's why it doesn't happen often to things that are easily damaged, have sharp edges, or need to be handled carefully. Usually, by the time you're real, most of your fur has worn away. Your eyes might fall out and you get loose in the joints quite shabby. But none of that matters, because once you're real, you can't be ugly, except to those who don't understand." "I guess you're real," said the rabbit, then immediately wished he hadn't, thinking the skin horse might be sensitive about it. But the skin horse just smiled. "The boy's uncle made me real," he said. "That was many years ago, but once you're real, you can't go back to being unreal. It lasts forever." The rabbit sighed, thinking it would be a long time before he experienced this magic called real. He longed to become real and feel what it was like, but the thought of growing shabby and losing his eyes and whiskers made him feel sad. He wished he could become real without going through these uncomfortable changes. There was a person named Nana who was in charge of the nursery, Sometimes she ignored toys scattered around, and other times, for no apparent reason, she would swoop in like a whirlwind and shove them into the cupboards. She called it tidying up, and all the toys hated it, especially the tin ones. The rabbit didn't mind as much because wherever he landed, he fell softly. One evening, as the boy was getting ready for bed, he couldn't find the china dog that always slept with him. Nana was in a rush and didn't want to search for the china dog at bedtime, so she glanced around and saw that the toy cupboard door was open. Without much thought, she made a quick decision. "Here," she said, "take your old bunny. He'll be fine to sleep with you." And she pulled the rabbit out by one ear and handed him to the boy. That night, and for many nights after, the Velveteen Rabbit slept in the boy's bed. At first it was uncomfortable because the boy hugged him tightly, sometimes rolling over on him and pushing him so far under the pillow that the rabbit could barely breathe. He also missed the long moonlight hours in the nursery when the house was silent and he could talk with the skin horse. But soon he began to enjoy it. The boy talked to him and made cosy tunnels under the blankets, saying they were like the burrows real rabbits lived in. They played wonderful games together, whispering when Nana left for supper and the night lights burned on the mantelpiece. When the boy fell asleep, the rabbit snuggled under his warm chin and dreamed, with the boy's hands wrapped around him all night long. Time passed and the little rabbit was very happy. So happy that he didn't notice how his beautiful velveteen fur was getting more and more worn, his tail becoming unsewn and all the pink fading from his nose from the boy's kisses. Spring arrived and they spent long days in the garden because wherever the boy went, the rabbit went too. He got carried around in a wagon, had picnics on the grass, and had lovely fairy huts built for him under the raspberry canes beneath the flower border. Once, when the boy was suddenly called away for tea, the rabbit was left on the lawn until long after dusk, and Nana had to come and find him with a candle because the boy couldn't sleep without him. The rabbit was soaked with dew and quite dirty from diving into the burrows the boy had made for him in the flower bed, and Nana grumbled as she wiped him off with the corner of her apron. "You must have your old bunny," she said, "all this fuss over a toy." The boy sat up in bed and reached out his hands. "Give me my bunny," he said. "You can't say that. He's not a toy, he's real." When the little rabbit heard that, he was overjoyed because he knew what the skin horse had said was finally true. The nursery magic had happened to him, and he was no longer just a toy, he was real. The boy himself had said it. That night, he was almost too happy to sleep, and so much love filled his little sawdust heart that it almost burst. In his boot-button eyes, which had long ago lost their shine, there came a look of wisdom and beauty. So much so that even Nana noticed it the next morning when she picked him up and said, "Well, look at that. This old bunny has such a clever expression." That summer was amazing. Near their house was a wooded area, and on long June evenings, the boy loved to go there after dinner to play. He always took the Velveteen Rabbit with him, and before he went off to pick flowers or play, pretend among the trees, he would make a cosy little nest for the rabbit among the ferns. He was a kind-hearted boy and wanted Bunny to be comfortable. One evening while the rabbit was lying there alone, watching the ant scurry between his velvet paws in the grass, he saw two strange creatures emerge from the tall ferns nearby. They were rabbits like him, but completely furry and brand new. They must have been very well made because their seams didn't show at all, and they changed shape in a strange way when they moved. One moment they were long and thin, and the next they were short and plump, unlike him, who always stayed the same shape. Their feet patted softly on the ground as they crept close to him, twitching their noses, while the rabbit stared hard to see where their wind-up mechanism might be, because he thought that rabbits who could jump must have something to wind them up. But he couldn't see anything. They were clearly a different kind of rabbit altogether. They stared at him, and the little rabbit stared back. Their noses twitched the whole time. "Why don't you get up and play with us?" one of them asked. "I don't feel like it," said the rabbit. not wanting to admit he didn't have any clockwork. "Come on," said the furry rabbit, "it's easy," and he gave a big hop to the side and stood on his hind legs. "I don't think you can," he said. "I can," said the little rabbit. "I can jump higher than anything." He meant when the boy threw him, but he didn't want to say that. "Can you hop on your hind legs?" asked the furry rabbit. That was a terrible question because the Velveteen Rabbit had no hind legs at all. His back was made in one solid piece like a pincushion. He sat still in the ferns, hoping the other rabbits wouldn't notice. "I don't want to," he said again. But wild rabbits have very sharp eyes. One of them stretched out his neck and looked. "He doesn't have any hind legs," he called out. "Can you believe a rabbit without hind legs?" And he started to laugh. "I do have hind legs," protested the little rabbit. "I'm sitting on them." "Then stretch them out and show me, like this," said the wild rabbit. He started spinning around and dancing until the little rabbit felt dizzy. "I don't like dancing," he said. "I'd rather just sit here." But deep down he really wanted to dance. A strange tickly feeling ran through him, and he wished he could jump around like the wild rabbits. The strange rabbit stopped dancing and came closer. He got so close that his long whiskers brushed against the Velveteen Rabbit's ear. Then he suddenly wrinkled his nose, flattened his ears, and he jumped back. "He doesn't smell right," he exclaimed. "He's not a real rabbit at all." "I am real," the little rabbit insisted. "I am real." The boy said so. He was on the verge of tears. Just then they heard footsteps, and the boy ran by. With a stamp of the feet and a flash of white tails, the two strange rabbits vanished. "Come back and play with me," called the little rabbit. "Please come back, I know I'm real." But there was no response. The little ants continued scurrying around, and the ferns swayed gently where the two rabbits had been. The Velveteen Rabbit was all alone. "Oh no," he thought. "Why did they run away like that? Why couldn't they stop and talk to me?" He lay there for a long time, watching the ferns and hoping they would come back, but they never did. Eventually, the sun set, little white moths began to flutter about, and the boy came to carry him home. Weeks went by, and the little rabbit became very old and worn out. The boy loved him just the same. He loved him so much that he wore off all his whiskers. The pink inside of his ears turned grey, and his brown spots faded. He even began to lose his shape and barely looked like a rabbit anymore, except to the boy. To the boy he was always beautiful, and that was all that mattered to the little rabbit. He didn't care how he looked to anyone else, because the nursery magic had made him real, and when you're real, being shabby doesn't matter. Then, one day, the boy fell ill. His face became very flushed, he talked in his sleep, and his little body was so hot that it burned the rabbit when he held him close. Strange people came and went in the nursery, and the light burned all night. Throughout it all, the little Velveteen Rabbit stayed hidden under the bedclothes, not moving at all, because he was afraid someone might find him and take him away. He knew the boy needed him. It was a long and tiring time because the boy was too sick to play, and the little rabbit found it pretty boring with nothing to do all day. But he stayed patient, looking forward to when the boy would be well again, so they could go outside into the garden, play among the flowers and butterflies, and have fun in the raspberry bushes like they used to. He imagined all sorts of wonderful things, and while the boy was lying half asleep, he snuggled close to the pillow and whispered in his ear. Eventually the fever passed, and the boy started to get better. He could sit up in bed and look at picture books, with the little rabbit cuddled close beside him. One day he was allowed to get up and get dressed. It was a bright, sunny morning, and the windows were wide open. They had taken the boy onto the balcony, wrapped in a shawl, and the little rabbit lay tangled up among the bedclothes, lost in thought. The boy was going to the seaside the next day. Everything was planned, and now they needed just to follow the doctor's orders. They discussed it all while the little rabbit lay under the covers, with only his head poking out, listening. The room needed to be disinfected, and all the books and toys the boy had played with in bed had to be burnt. Hooray, thought the little rabbit. Tomorrow we're going to the seaside. The boy had talked about the seaside a lot, and the rabbit was excited to see the big waves, tiny crabs and sandcastles. Just then, Nana noticed him. "What about this old bunny?" she asked. "That," said the doctor. "It's covered in scarlet fever germs. Burn it straight away." "What? Nonsense. Get him a new one. He can't keep that one." So Little Rabbit was put into a sack along with the old picture books and a bunch of other junk and taken to the end of the garden behind the chicken coop. It was a good spot for a bonfire, but the gardener was too busy at the moment to deal with it. He had potatoes to dig and green peas to pick, but he promised to come back early the next morning to burn everything. That night, the boy slept in a different bedroom with a new bunny. It was a great bunny, all white plush with real glass eyes, but the boy was too excited to care much about it. Tomorrow he was going to the seaside, and that was so amazing he couldn't think about anything else. While the boy was asleep, dreaming about the seaside, the little rabbit lay among the old picture books in the corner behind the chicken coop, feeling very lonely. The sack had been left open, so by wriggling a bit, he managed to get his head through the gap and look out. He was shivering slightly because he was used to sleeping in a proper bed, and by now his coat was so worn out from being hugged, it offered no warmth. Nearby he could see the tall, dense raspberry bushes that once felt like a tropical jungle where he'd played with the boy on sunny mornings. He thought about all those happy times in the garden, the fairy huts in the flower bed, quiet evenings in the woods when he lay in the ferns and the little lambs ran over his paws, and the amazing day when he first realised he was real. He remembered the skin horse, so wise and gentle, and all the advice he had given him. What was the point of being loved, losing one's beauty, and becoming real if it all ended like this? A tear, a real tear, rolled down his little shabby velvet nose and fell to the ground. Then something extraordinary happened. Right where the tears had fallen, a flower started to grow, an unusual flower, unlike any in the garden. It had slender leaves the colour of emeralds, and in the centre of the leaves was a blossom shaped like a golden cup. It was so stunning that the little rabbit forgot about his sadness and lay there watching. Soon the blossom opened and out stepped a fairy. She was the most beautiful fairy you could imagine. Her dress was made of pearls and dewdrops, and she wore flowers around her neck and in her hair. Her face was like the most perfect flower of all. She approached the little rabbit, gently picked him up in her arms, and kissed his velveteen nose, which was still moist from his tears. "Little rabbit," she said, "don't you recognise who I am?" The rabbit looked up at her and felt he had seen her face before, but he couldn't quite remember where. "I'm the nursery magic fairy," she explained. "I look after all the toys and children that have loved. When they get old and worn out and the children no longer need them, I come and take them away and turn them into real." "Wasn't I real before?" asked the little rabbit. "You were real to the boy," the fairy said, "because he loved you. Now you'll be real to everyone." She held the little rabbit close in her arms and flew with him into the woods. It was light now, as the moon had risen. The forest was enchanting, and the ferns glistened like frosted silver. In a clearing between the tree trunks, the wild rabbits danced with their shadows on the soft grass. When they saw the fairy, they all stopped dancing and gathered in a circle to watch her. "I've brought you a new friend," the fairy said. "You need to be very kind to him and teach him everything he needs to know in Rabbitland, because he's going to live with you forever." She kissed the little rabbit once more and placed him gently on the grass. "Go on and play, little rabbit," she said. The little rabbit sat still for a moment, not moving. Seeing the wild rabbits dancing around him made him remember his hind legs, and he didn't want them to see that he was made all in one piece. He didn't know that the fairy had transformed him when she kissed him the last time. He might have stayed frozen, too shy to move, if something hadn't tickled his nose. Without thinking, he lifted his hind toe to scratch it. To his surprise, he actually had hind legs, instead of old Velveteen. He had soft, shiny brown fur, his ears twitched on their own, and his whiskers were so long they brushed the grass. He leapt for joy, bouncing around on his new hind legs, jumping and spinning like the others. He was so excited that by the time he stopped to look for the fairy, she was gone. At last, he was a real rabbit, fitting right in with the other rabbits. Autumn came and went. And then winter passed. In the spring, when the days turned warm and sunny, the boy went outside to play in the woods behind the house. While he was playing, 2 rabbits peeked out from the ferns. One was entirely brown, while the other had unique markings on his fur, like old spots that never fully faded. There was something familiar about his soft little nose and round black eyes, so the boy thought, he looks just like my old bunny that got lost when I had scarlet fever. But he never realised there was actually his old bunny, back to visit the child who had first made him real.